When Joyce Meyer announced that Joni Lamb had been let go from Daystar, many in the Christian media community were taken aback. Fans and staff at Daystar are now questioning everything they believe to be true about the network and its executives in light of Meyer's shocking revelations on Joni's behind-the-scenes behavior. Keep checking back as more surprising information becomes available, and the real reason for this startling action is ultimately exposed. When Joni Lamb made the decision to be married so soon, many in the Christian media community were taken aback. Given that Joni's husband Marcus Lamb, a co-founder of Daystar television network, had passed away just before she announced her intention to wed Dr. Doug Weiss, a renowned marriage counselor with family connections, this was particularly true. This decision was even more unexpected given how swiftly it was made. Many individuals who had been keeping up with Joni's career. Given that Joni had recently lost her husband, those in her ministry and personal life were taken aback by how fast the connection blossomed. The Christian world was taken aback by the relationship's timing. Joni, who had always been seen as a devoted and devout leader, appeared to be jumping into a new phase of her life before she had even had time to process her husband's passing. Only a few months after her husband's passing, she made the decision to remarry. Many questioned why, in the wake of Marcus's passing, she was making such a significant move. Was she attempting to fill a vacuum created by her late husband, or was she truly ready? Some believe that Joni was attempting to skip over the emotional healing process in order to swiftly move on from her loss and pain. Rumors of her hasty marriage to Doug Weiss began to circulate as their connection deepened. It was interpreted as a show of power by some. Others interpreted Joni's behavior as unstable, implying that she may not have been prepared for such a significant choice. People in Daystar began to wonder how fast things were moving, particularly those who knew her well. The significance of the marriage for Daystar's future and its leadership was more important than the marriage itself. The woman in question had been. She was now embarking on a new chapter in her life that was rapidly turning into a spectacle. She was the public face of Daystar, the ministry she and her husband founded. People were wondering whether her new romance was distracting her from her role as the ministry's leader. More people than ever before were watching Joni as rumors about her new relationship spread, raising concerns about her leadership style. Was she still leading the ministry, or was her personal life now interfering with her leadership? Then came the startling announcement that Daystar had let go of Joni Lamb. Everyone in the network and the Christian community at large was taken aback by this abrupt change in circumstances. How did the lady who led Daystar through decades of success, co-founded the organization, and devoted her life to its cause suddenly lose her job? The revelation that Joyce Meyer, a well-known Christian leader and close friend of Joni's, had been the one to divulge what had been happening behind closed doors added to the shock. It wasn't merely a dispute it was something far more serious than a personal fallout. Many people were left wondering what went wrong, what was happening behind the scenes that resulted in this dramatic event, and why a woman who had spent so much time creating Daystar ended up in such a compromising situation after Joni Lamb was fired and the public revelations that followed. At first, the answers were unclear, but the ramifications were profound. The conflicts inside Daystar and Joni's hasty marriage proposal appeared to. For her and the network, it marked the beginning of a new, uncertain chapter. Long before the world became aware of Joni Lamb's hasty decision to get married and the ensuing controversy, things were shifting within the Daystar TV network behind its polished facade. For many years, Daystar was seen as a shining example of Christian television, a place where ministry, family, and faith all joined together to serve millions of viewers worldwide. Over time, individuals closest to the network began to hear whispers of power struggles and changing goals. The roots of what many believed to be a close-knit family ministry were being shaken by tensions that had hitherto been kept under wraps. As Daystar's co-founder and leader, Joni Lamb was well known in the Christian television industry. She and her late husband Marcus had been the show's faces for years. The flame had always been gracefully held by her. She was well known for being an active leader who participated in all aspects of the network's operations, from programming choices to spiritual counseling. However, the network underwent a change over time, particularly following Marcus' passing. Once seen as a collaborative leader, Joni began to assume a more authoritarian position at Daystar. Only a few people initially noticed the shift, minor choices made once. Joni was now the only one making decisions with feedback from the broader Daystar leadership team. What had once been a family-run company where many opinions were valued and heard now appeared to be moving in a more unified direction. Since Joni was still seen as the main reason for Daystar's success, most people weren't initially bothered by this concentration of power. However, over time, more individuals became aware that her leadership style had become more. Those who had been involved with Daystar from the beginning and contributed to the network's development began to feel ignored. Family, friends, and longtime workers also began to realize that their views were not being considered. Less input was being used to make decisions, and Joni's vision appeared to take precedence over everyone else's suggestions. This altered the connections inside the leadership staff at Daystar began to exhibit symptoms of stress. The formerly cohesive group was now divided, and some members, including Joni's own family, began to feel more and more cut off from Daystar's course. Jonathan Lamb, Joni's son, in particular, was at conflict with his mother after being assigned to assume a more significant leadership position within the network. As Jonathan became aware that his opinions were being disregarded, and that his potential as one of Daystar's leaders wasn't receiving enough notice. This rage was deeply personal, and wasn't limited to arguments at work. Jonathan was supposed to continue the family tradition after years of learning from his father Marcus. However, Jonathan felt overlooked as Joni's influence over Daystar increased. The two were increasingly estranged as a result of his mother's increasing lack of empathy and authority and his inability to participate in significant decisions. When Joni's personal life began to influence the events at Daystar, the mother-son connection became even more bizarre. Her hasty marriage to Christian marriage counselor and family friend Dr. Doug Weiss exacerbated the network's already odd relationships. There was a great deal of controversy about the wedding's date. Many believed that Joni and Doug's relationship was developing too soon, particularly in light of Marcus' recent death. Joni's defense of her relationship was interpreted by some as an indication that she had shifted her focus from the ministry to her personal life. Those close to Daystar began discussing the developments they had witnessed behind closed doors. According to former employees and those who had close working relationships with the Lamb family, the environment at Daystar had undergone significant shift in the last few years. It felt more like a company where a small number of individuals held a lot of power, and loyalty was rewarded with favors than it did as a place for candid discussions and family-centered ideals. Disillusionment was growing among many who had formerly devoted their lives to the network's purpose. The initial mission of the ministry appeared to be being impeded by the personal ambitions of important members of the Lamb family, particularly Joni. As Joni's leadership grew more dominant, the division within the family deepened. Worsened, family members and others who had previously worked with her began to feel alienated in a ministry they had helped establish. The family dynamic was significantly exacerbated by the entrance of Doug Weiss. Many believe that Doug's rapid ascent to fame within the network was a part of a broader trend of Joni consolidating power within her, even though Joni defended his role in Daystar. Doug's influence in the ministry appeared to increase daily, and he started to have a bigger say in Daystar's leadership choices and programming. Some believe that the ministry's transition to a new generation of leaders was a logical next step. Others viewed it as a power grab by Joni, who utilized her connections to enlist supporters, who would support her in maintaining control of the network. Everyone was affected by these developments, not just the leadership and employees. The friendly, inviting image of Daystar began to wane. Within the network, which had been based on community, family, and church, there were reports of power struggles and conflicts. But it appeared to be succumbing to the same issues, avarice, power, and self-interest, that had harmed several previous societies. It became evident that the Daystar that everyone knew and loved was different as the family broke up. Millions of viewers had once found inspiration and optimism in it, but now it was a battlefield with conflicting allegiances and an unclear future for the network. Even though Joni gave the impression that she was a strong and self-assured leader, those closest to her could see how the emotional strain of these disputes was impacting her. She had to fight to maintain control of Daystar, which she had spent decades developing into the international platform it is today. Her personal life stress in addition to the Joni felt isolated and overburdened as tensions increased within the ministry. The future of Daystar appeared less assured than ever, and her once close-knit family was now divided. Joni grew increasingly protective as the walls began to shut in on her, isolating herself from the trusted staff and family members who had been her strongest supporters. The trust that had been established over the years started to erode, and there was a noticeable sense of betrayal in the ministry. It became evident that the ministry was at a turning point as the internal conflicts inside Daystar grew more intense. The once unified network and family were now divided, and Daystar's future was unclear. Would the division between family and leadership be too great to mend, or would Joni be able to restore the ministry and regain the trust of those who had stood by her? Daystar's transformation signaled the beginning of a new chapter in the network's history. That was a time of uncertainty, strife, and loss. It was unclear how to go, and what had once given millions of people hope was now only a shell of what it once was. Would Daystar overcome its issues, or would it turn into just another tale of how families are corrupted by power? Time would tell. The altercation between Joyce Meyer and Joni Lamb was something that, while many Christians anticipated this, few anticipated it would occur in such a stunning and public manner. Joni and Joyce had been allies and close friends for years. With their own platforms, but similar values and objectives, both were influential women in the field of faith-based media. They had collaborated on numerous initiatives, supported one another in resolving personal and professional issues, and even organized ministry events together. However, as time passed, the relationship began to show indications of weakness, and when it ended, it was painful for both of them. When it began gently, everyone was taken aback. The two women's once close friendship began to feel less intimate as a result of minor adjustments in their communication styles. A well-known and esteemed Christian leader with a sizable fan base, Joyce Meyer had always been someone. Over the years, they had discussed everything from personal issues to church work, and their bond appeared solid. However, problems started to build beneath the surface as Joni's authority as Daystar's leader increased. There was more to it than business or differences of opinion regarding the ministry's course. Insiders began to notice that Joni was acting differently. Although she had always been regarded as a kind, honest, and cooperative leader, she appeared to have changed in the last few years, particularly following the passing of her husband Marcus. Rumors circulated that she had grown more reclusive and domineering. Some even claimed that she had begun to. She prioritized her own notoriety and influence over the principles of faith, family, and service upon which Daystar was built. Joyce Meyer, whose own ministry was founded on integrity, modesty, and service, began to have concerns about Daystar's course at the same time. She had been friends with Joni for a long time and had witnessed her growth as a leader, but According to certain stories, this new Joni was unique. Joyce attempted to discuss her worries with Joni in private, but Joni didn't appear interested. She was preoccupied with her own strategy to increase her authority inside Daystar, and their relationship began to deteriorate. Joyce, who had always been straightforward and honest, began discussing her concerns more publicly as she became aware of the shifts in Joni's leadership style. Joyce didn't hesitate to discuss what she perceived as a shift in. Things really started to go south for Joni when Joyce expressed in public her concerns about the network's future. Joyce was one of her best friends and someone she had looked to for guidance and support, so this was a heartbreaking blow. Joyce's public criticism of her leadership was a betrayal on both a personal and professional level for her. This type of public backlash was devastating for someone like Joni, whose reputation was based on her leadership at Daystar. Supporters and admirers of both women found themselves in the center. While some believed Joni had lost her path, others were taken aback by Joyce's remarks. It was difficult for those who had followed Daystar and the Lamb family for years to reconcile the more domineering and solitary Joni with the powerful, religious leader they had respected. In response, Joni reacted in the only manner she knew how. She went on the defensive. Despite Joyce's negative remarks, she claimed that she had always had good intentions and that she needed to concentrate on leadership if she wanted Daystar to survive and prosper. Though intended to comfort her supporters, her public declarations that her devotion to the ministry and love for God had not altered, instead served to worsen the situation. The public backlash between Joyce and Joni wasn't merely a private matter. It was an indication of a larger problem. More significantly, it demonstrated the conflict between two distinct leadership philosophies and methods for dealing with faith-based media. On one side was Joni, who was once seen as a leader who prioritized family and collaborated well with others, but whose priorities appeared to have changed to power consolidation. Joyce, who had always advocated for servant leadership and a more equitable approach to ministry, was on the other side. Joyce had always been honest and humble. It escalated into a brawl as their tension increased. As soon as word got out, it became evident that this was no longer a friendly argument, but rather a full-fledged public conflict. Supporters of Joyce stated that Joni had let her power to control her, while others sided with Joni, claiming that she was merely taking the necessary steps to keep Daystar moving forward. Many began to question what this meant for Daystar's future after the repercussions. Once a beacon of Christian programming, the network was now enmeshed in internal strife and scandal. Was the harm already done, or would Joni be able to repair her reputation and regain the confidence of her supporters? What about the legacy of Daystar? Would Joni's leadership transform the ministry into something quite different, or would it continue down the course that Marcus and Joni had initially intended? The public conflict between the altercation between Joyce Meyer and Joni Lamb marked a sea change for Daystar, as well as for the two ladies. It revealed severe organizational divides and raised significant issues with responsibility and transparency of leadership in faith-based media. One thing became evident as the drama unfolded and the dust settled. Joni would never be able to enjoy Daystar the same way. Her ties and reliability were now being questioned, and the altercation with Joyce was only the beginning of a much larger reckoning. The ministry was disbanded, and Joni Lamb was uncertain about what lay ahead. The difficulties she would face were only beginning to manifest, and the path ahead would not be simple. Was this the end for Joni as a leader, or would she be able to regain control of Daystar? Time would tell, but one thing was certain: Daystar had been rocked by Joyce Meyer's class, and Meyer's remarks against Joni Lamb would have a lasting impact. For many years, Daystar led the Christian media landscape, inspiring hope and trust in millions of people. In command was Joni Lamb, the network's co-founder, and a lady who is respected for her leadership and commitment to sharing the gospel. However, Daystar's future was threatened when Joyce Meyer, a highly esteemed member of the Christian community, voiced her disapproval of Joni's leadership. Joyce was highly critical, forthright, and frank. She claimed that Joni prioritized her own objectives over the ministry's initial mission. The consequences felt like a betrayal to some who had been Daystar fans for years. It was challenging to make the connection between the person Joyce portrayed, someone who had grown more dictatorial and intent on maintaining control, and the Joni Lamb they had admired, the kind, devout woman who contributed to Daystar becoming a powerful network. Joyce's remarks were more worse because they were. Joyce had been Joni's close friend and ally for years, so she wasn't just any stranger. At one point, the two women's bond looked indestructible because they had worked together in ministry. It was clear that there was a major problem at Daystar when Joyce made such negative remarks regarding Joni's leadership. The consequences were immediate. Both women's admirers were taken aback. Joni was defended by others as a leader who was merely taking necessary actions to maintain Daystar. Some agreed with Joyce, claiming that Joni had forgotten the principles that once made Daystar outstanding. Others were simply perplexed, wondering how the ministry had changed from a source of inspiration and hope to one that was rife with strife and controversy. However, the impact was not limited to Daystar followers and admirers. It also affected employees and volunteers who had been collaborating with Joni for years. Many in the network began to doubt their own stances as the conflict between Joyce and Joni intensified. Given the grave charges against Joni, how could they still be by her side? How could they stay employed by a network with disorganized leadership? Joyce's reputation suffered over time, whereas Joni's was harmed immediately. For years, Daystar had been a shining example of Christian broadcasting, and by adhering to its core principles of service, family, and faith, it had amassed a devoted fan base. Many began to question whether Daystar had been more concerned with preserving the authority and influence of those at the top than with sharing the gospel. However, now that Joyce's remarks were looming over the network, Daystar's future was unclear. Would Joni be able to bounce back from the criticism, restore her reputation, and restore the network to its former splendor? It became evident that the inquiries into Daystar's leadership were only beginning as the weeks passed and additional tales surfaced. What this meant for the Lamb family's future at Daystar was one of the main concerns. It was difficult to envision Daystar without Joni's leadership because she had been the network's spokesperson for so long, but now that it was unclear whether the Lamb family would remain in control or if new leadership would need to step in, given her leadership being questioned and her personal connections in ruins. Long regarded as Daystar's leader, Jonathan Lamb was Joni's son, but doubts were raised about his suitability due to reports of a growing schism between the mother and son. Daystar found itself at a turning point. Faith, honesty, and family had been the cornerstones of the network's empire, but now they were being questioned. Could the network figure out a method to? It was also evident that Daystar's and Joni Lamb's leadership's futures hinged on how the network handled the consequences of Joyce Meyer's remarks. Would they analyze their leadership, values, and mission to determine whether they still align with the gospel message they claim to stand for, or would they try to downplay the situation and hope it would go away? The conflict between Joyce and Joni forced the Christian media community to confront some harsh realities regarding accountability, leadership, and power. It served as a reminder that everyone is subject to criticism, regardless of their level of authority, and that even the most well-respected leaders can make mistakes. This public altercation would have a lasting impact on Daystar, the Lamb family, and the Christian media industry overall. Ultimately, Daystar's future would be influenced by both the leaders' acts and the how did they handle the issues they encountered. Would they decide to be honest, humble, and committed to the principles that had made Daystar a religious role model for many, Or would they risk losing their viewers' faith in order to preserve their reputation and power? For years to come, Daystar's impact and the direction of Christian broadcasting would be determined by the responses to these questions.